I, 27F, don't really know how to start this without sounding bitter, so I'll just say it plainly. I've always been the spare. My parents wanted a son. Not in a subtle, we'll be happy either way kind of way. In a very clear, very vocal way. They had already picked out a boy's name before I was born. When I came out a girl, my mom later told me, half laughing, that my dad didn't speak much in the hospital room that day. 2 years later, my brother was born. And, just like that, the sun finally rose in our house. Growing up, I didn't understand it at first. I just knew that when my brother cried, my parents rushed. When I cried, I was too sensitive. When he broke something, it was boys being boys. When I made a mistake, it was proof that I wasn't trying hard enough. Family friends would come over and hear my dad say things like, "He's going to do great things one day." I can feel it. About me? She's calm. She doesn't cause trouble. That was supposed to be a compliment. I don't remember a single birthday where I didn't feel like an afterthought. My gifts were practical. His were dreams, science kits, sports gear, expensive courses. I learned early that if I wanted something, I'd better not ask. The only person who ever looked at me like I mattered was my grandmother. She used to hold my face in her hands and say, "You're not less. You are just surrounded by people who don't see." I didn't understand what she meant back then. Now I do. I think the real damage didn't come from being ignored. It came from being compared. Once my brother and I started school, everything became a competition, except I was the only one competing. If I brought home a 95%, my mom would say, "That's good. But your brother got 98%. If he brought home a 70%, my dad would shrug and say, "He's just bored. He's too smart for this material." Every achievement of mine was reduced to almost. Every failure of his was reframed as potential. They started doing it publicly. At family dinners. At holidays. In front of relatives. Why can't you be more confident like your brother? Your brother isn't afraid to take risks. Your brother has leadership energy. I was 12 when I first started believing I was fundamentally less. It didn't matter that I was on the honor roll every year. It didn't matter that teachers praised me for being disciplined and hardworking. At home, I was the example of what not to be: too quiet, too serious, too plain. My brother started absorbing it too. He would laugh when they compared us. Sometimes he'd say, "It's not my fault I'm the talented one." And my parents would smile like it was a cute joke. I stopped defending myself after a while. What was the point? When the narrative is decided for you before you're old enough to understand it, you just grow into it. By 16, my self-esteem was basically dust. I didn't apply for competitions I qualified for because I assumed I wouldn't win. I didn't speak up in class even when I knew the answers. I made myself smaller because that's what felt safe. Meanwhile, my parents were already talking about my brother's future empire. And me? I was still the backup plan. If it weren't for my grandmother, I honestly think I would have disappeared into myself completely. She was the only person in my family who treated me like I wasn't second place. When I was little, she'd invite me to stay over on weekends. We'd bake, read, sit in her tiny kitchen while she told me stories about how she used to work 2 jobs and still managed to put herself through school. "You don't wait for someone to believe in you," she'd say. "You build something so solid they can't ignore it." When I was 17, I got accepted into one of the most prestigious universities in the country. I remember holding the acceptance letter in my hands, shaking. It was the first time I felt chosen. My parents' reaction? My dad said, "That's expensive." My mom asked, "Are you sure you can handle that level?" They didn't say they were proud. They didn't ask what I wanted to study. They didn't offer to help. A week later, my grandmother called me over. She already knew. She told me she had been saving money for years. Not for my brother. Not for vacations. For me. She said, "If your parents won't invest in you, I will." I cried so hard I could barely breathe. My parents didn't fight her on it. They just said, "Well, if she wants to waste her savings." Waste. That word stayed with me the entire first year at university. Every exam, every presentation, every sleepless night, I carried this quiet fear that maybe they were right. But something started changing. Away from home, no one knew I was the spare. Professors judged me on my work. Classmates valued my ideas. For the first time in my life, I wasn't compared to anyone. I was just me. And apparently, that was enough. University didn't magically fix my confidence, but it gave me space to breathe. For the first time, I wasn't living in my brother's shadow. No one there knew about the comparisons, the subtle digs, the way I was always positioned as almost. Professors evaluated me based on my work. Group projects depended on my reliability. People actually listened when I spoke. I studied harder than anyone I knew. Not because I wanted to prove my parents wrong anymore, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't an accident. By my third year, I landed an internship at a well-known company in my field. I remember calling home, thinking maybe this would finally earn me a "we're proud of you." My dad said, "Internships don't mean much. Let's see what real job you get." My mom asked, "How's your brother doing?" "He's thinking about launching a startup." Of course he was. But this time, their indifference didn't break me the way it used to. I graduated with honors. I got a full-time job offer before I even walked across the stage. The company had a supportive team, a fair manager, and real growth opportunities. My boss saw potential in me, actual, measurable potential, not just the fantasy version my parents projected onto my brother. Within a year, I was promoted. Within 2, I was leading small projects. For the first time in my life, my success wasn't theoretical. It wasn't maybe someday. It was real, tangible, earned. And it scared me how good it felt to build something without them. I didn't tell my parents when I started saving seriously. Part of me was afraid they'd laugh. Another part was afraid they'd somehow find a way to make it about my brother. So I stayed quiet. I worked extra hours. I took on side projects. I avoided unnecessary spending. While my brother was brainstorming business ideas and quitting jobs that were beneath his vision, I was slowly building stability. 3 years into my career, I had enough for a down payment. I remember standing in front of the house for the first time, nothing huge or flashy. Just a clean, modern place with big windows and a small yard. It wasn't about status. It was about ownership. About proof. Proof that I wasn't the spare. When I signed the papers, my hands were shaking again, just like when I got into university. Only this time, I didn't need anyone to validate it. I invited my grandmother over first. She walked through every room like it was a palace. She hugged me in the kitchen and whispered, "You see? They didn't see you, but you saw yourself." When I finally told my parents, there was silence on the phone. My dad asked, "How much did it cost?" My mom said, "That's a lot of responsibility for someone like you." Someone like me. Not "we're proud." Not "congratulations." Just concern disguised as doubt. But something had shifted. Their words didn't sink in the way they used to. I had a key in my pocket. My name on a deed. For the first time, I felt untouchable. I didn't know yet that my brother was watching. While my life was stabilizing, my brother's was unraveling. For years, my parents had funded his potential. Business ideas that never launched. Courses he dropped halfway through. Partnerships that failed because other people didn't understand his vision. Every time something collapsed, there was a new excuse. The market isn't ready. He's too innovative. People are jealous. Meanwhile, he moved back home. At first it was temporary. Then it became indefinite. He stopped talking about his big plans and started talking about how the world was unfair. How investors didn't recognize talent. How people didn't support ambition. My parents doubled down instead of waking up. He just needs more time. Genius isn't always understood immediately. He'll make it big. You'll see. They said it with the same certainty they used when I was a child, the same certainty that made me feel small. Except now, I wasn't small anymore. I would visit occasionally. I'd see him sprawled on the couch in the middle of the day while my mom brought him coffee, like he was recovering from a battle instead of avoiding responsibility. And then he came to see my house. He walked through it slowly, touching the walls, looking at the floors, opening cabinets like he was evaluating something he might buy himself. "This is nice," he said. But it didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like calculation. I didn't recognize the look in his eyes at the time. I do now. It started small. A coworker asked me one day casually, "Hey, is everything okay with your finances?" I laughed because it felt random. Yeah. Why? She hesitated. Oh, nothing. I just heard something. That was the first crack. Within a week, I felt it, the subtle shift. Conversations stopping when I entered a room. My manager asking more questions than usual. An HR meeting request that made my stomach drop. Apparently, someone had contacted people at my company anonymously. They claimed I had manipulated internal data to secure promotions. That I had connections influencing decisions. That I was financially unstable and had taken questionable loans to buy my house. None of it was true. But rumors don't need truth. They just need confidence. When I finally traced the source, through a mutual acquaintance who slipped up, my chest felt like it was caving in. It was my brother. He hadn't confronted me. He hadn't asked for help. He hadn't even hinted at resentment. He had simply decided that if he couldn't rise to my level, he would pull me down to his. When I called him, he didn't deny it right away. "You think you're better than everyone now," he said. "I just told people the truth as I see it. Don't act innocent." The worst part? For a split second, that old voice inside me whispered, "Maybe you don't deserve it. Maybe you did something wrong." That's what years of being the spare does to you. It makes you doubt your own innocence. HR opened a formal review. My manager looked disappointed, not angry, just cautious. The house I had fought for suddenly felt fragile. I was one bad decision away from losing everything I built. And my parents? They said, "There must be some misunderstanding. Your brother wouldn't do that without reason." The investigation lasted 3 weeks. 3 of the longest weeks of my life. HR pulled emails, reviewed performance data, interviewed my team. My manager sat across from me one afternoon and said, carefully, "We just need to make sure everything is clean." Everything was clean. That was the maddening part. But when you grow up constantly being told you're not enough, you start bracing for punishment even when you've done nothing wrong. I barely slept. I replayed every project in my head. Every decision. Every conversation. At one point, I stood in my living room, the house I worked so hard for, and thought, this can't be how it ends. My brother, meanwhile, doubled down. He told relatives I had changed. That success had made me arrogant. That I thought I was superior to the family. My parents called me not to ask how I was holding up, but to say, "Your brother is really hurt. You should try to understand his perspective." His perspective. Not the fact that he was trying to destroy my career. When HR finally called me in for the final meeting, I felt numb. They had found nothing. Not a single manipulated file. Not a suspicious transaction. Not a performance inconsistency. In fact, my manager presented documentation showing I had exceeded targets consistently for 2 years. The anonymous claims were officially dismissed as malicious and unfounded. I kept my job. But more than that, something shifted inside me. For the first time, the system that mattered, the one built on facts and merit, chose me. Not because I was someone's daughter. Not because I was someone's sister. But because I had earned it. I walked out of that building and realized something terrifyingly liberating. I wasn't the spare anymore. And I didn't need my family to say it out loud. You'd think after everything my brother did, my parents would finally see it. They didn't. What they saw instead was this. Their daughter kept her job. Their daughter kept her house. Their son was still at home. And suddenly, their tone changed. My mom started calling more often. Not to apologize. Not to admit they were wrong. Just to check in. My dad asked detailed questions about my salary. About my mortgage. About my savings. At first, I thought maybe, finally, they were recognizing my stability. I was wrong. One Sunday, they came over to my house. Both of them. Together. That never happened unless something was serious. They sat at my kitchen table, the same kitchen my grandmother once stood in, and told me I wasn't invisible. My dad cleared his throat. "Your brother is going through a difficult time." I didn't respond. My mom added, "He just needs support to get back on his feet." Still silence from me. Then it came. "You're doing well," my dad said. "You have a good job. A house. Stability. Family helps family." There it was. Not, "We're sorry for not believing you." Not, "We handled things wrong." Not even, "He shouldn't have done that." Just an expectation. They wanted me to financially support the same brother who tried to sabotage my career. I actually laughed. It slipped out before I could stop it. My mom's face hardened. Don't be selfish. Selfish. After years of being overlooked, compared, undermined, nearly destroyed. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in front of them. I felt clear. I told them no. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just calmly. I'm not giving him money. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. My dad leaned back in his chair like I had just betrayed something sacred. After everything we've done for you? I actually blinked. What exactly did you do for me? I asked. My mom's voice sharpened. We raised you. We gave you a home. Food. Education. Education. Paid for by my grandmother. The house I was sitting in? Mine. The job they almost let my brother destroy? Mine. The stability they were now trying to access? Mine. You're being ungrateful, my mom said flatly. Your brother is struggling. And you're choosing money over family. That word, ungrateful, hit differently than all the others. Because gratitude implies you were given something. What exactly was I supposed to be grateful for? Being compared into the ground? Being treated like a backup plan? Almost losing everything because they refused to hold their golden child accountable? I looked at them and, for the first time, I didn't feel like their daughter trying to earn approval. I felt like an adult protecting her life. He tried to ruin me, I said quietly. And you defended him. My dad's response? He's your brother. Blood is blood. And that's when I realized something painful. To them, I was family when it was convenient. But I was competition when it wasn't. They left that day angry. I stayed in my kitchen, shaking not because I doubted my decision, but because I finally understood that saying no meant I would never again be their obedient spare. And they hated that. The next day, my grandmother called. My mom had already told her their version of the story. Apparently, I had changed. Apparently, success had made me cold. Apparently, I had abandoned the family. My grandmother didn't waste time. Tell me what actually happened, she said. So I did. All of it. The rumors. The HR investigation. The demand for money. The word ungrateful. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she sighed, not in disappointment. In recognition. They're still doing it, she said quietly. Doing what? Treating you like you owe them for surviving in a house where you were never prioritized. A few days later, she invited my parents over. She didn't tell them I'd be there. When they walked into her living room and saw me sitting beside her, my mom's expression tightened immediately. Before they could start, my grandmother did something I had never seen her do before. She got angry. You have the audacity, she said to them, to call her ungrateful? My dad tried to interrupt, but she raised her hand. Who paid for her education? She asked. Silence. Who encouraged her when you doubted her? Silence again. You invested everything in your son's fantasy, she continued. And now that reality has proven you wrong, you want her to finance your mistake. My mom looked embarrassed. My dad looked defensive. She is your daughter, my grandmother said firmly. Not your insurance policy. I felt something in my chest loosen that day. For years, I thought maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I misunderstood. But hearing someone say it out loud, someone they couldn't dismiss, changed everything. For the first time, it wasn't just me standing against them. It was truth. And they couldn't argue with it. After that confrontation, something shifted, not dramatically, not overnight, but noticeably. My parents stopped calling me ungrateful. They didn't apologize. That would require self-reflection. But they stopped demanding money. Instead, they tried something subtler. My mom started sending messages like, "We miss you." My dad texted once, "Let's move forward." No more drama. No acknowledgement of what happened. No accountability for defending my brother while he tried to sabotage me. Just a request to reset. Meanwhile, word about what my brother had done slowly made its way through the extended family. Not because I went around telling everyone, but because investigations leave paper trails. And people talk. Relatives who once praised his entrepreneurial spirit began asking quieter questions. He didn't like that. He sent me a long message one night, accusing me of turning everyone against him, saying I should have handled it privately, that I had embarrassed him. I didn't respond. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel responsible for protecting his image. The golden child narrative was cracking. And without that narrative, he was just a man who made bad decisions. My parents were stuck in an uncomfortable space. They couldn't fully defend him anymore, not publicly, but they also couldn't admit they had been wrong about me for decades. So they did what they've always done. They minimized. Let's not dwell on the past. Families go through things. Success shouldn't divide us. But it wasn't success that divided us. It was truth. I started pulling back. Not in a dramatic, I'm cutting you off forever kind of way. Just boundaries. Shorter phone calls. Fewer visits. No financial discussions. No defending myself anymore. If my mom tried to bring up my brother's struggles, I'd say, I hope he figures it out. If my dad hinted that I was lucky things worked out, I'd reply, it wasn't luck. I stopped explaining my success. I stopped shrinking it to make them comfortable. And something interesting happened. Without my constant effort to prove myself, the dynamic felt exposed. There was no tension on my side anymore. No desperation for approval. No subtle competition. Just distance. My brother tried once more to provoke me, a passive-aggressive comment at a family gathering about how corporate jobs are for people who lack vision. Old me would have internalized that. New me smiled and said, stability suits me. The room went quiet. For the first time, I didn't feel like the spare. I felt like someone who had quietly outgrown the room. My grandmother later squeezed my hand and whispered, you don't need to fight to be seen anymore. And she was right. I wasn't fighting for their recognition. I was protecting my peace. And that felt bigger than any house, any job title, any argument I could win. It felt like freedom. A few months passed. My brother eventually got a regular job. Not a startup. Not an empire. Just a normal job. My parents stopped talking about his destiny and started talking about responsibility. They never connected the dots out loud, but I could see it in their eyes. Reality had replaced fantasy. One evening, my dad called me. His tone was different. Quieter. I suppose, you handled things well, he said. That was the closest thing to acknowledgement I've ever received from him. Not, I'm sorry. Not, we were wrong. Just a reluctant recognition that I hadn't fallen apart the way they expected me to. Because I think, deep down, they always assumed I would. They thought I was fragile. Replaceable. Secondary. But I was the one who built something solid. My mom visited alone a week later. She walked through my house slowly, like my brother once did, only this time there was no calculation. She stopped in the kitchen and said, almost to herself, you did this on your own. It wasn't praise. It was realization. And for the first time, I didn't need more than that. I didn't need a rewritten childhood. I didn't need a dramatic apology. I just needed to know that I had stopped being their spare, not because they changed, but because I did. I used to think justice would look dramatic. An apology. Tears. A confession that they were wrong all along. That never happened. What I got instead was quieter, but maybe more powerful. I kept my job. I kept my house. I kept my peace. My brother stopped trying to compete with me once he realized I wasn't playing the game anymore. My parents stopped demanding once they understood I wouldn't bend. And my grandmother? She told me something recently that I think about a lot. They raised you like you were second, she said. But you built yourself like you were first. For most of my life, I believed I had to earn space in my own family. That love was conditional. That approval was scarce. Now I understand something different. I was never the spare. I was just the one they underestimated. And maybe the most freeing part of all this isn't that they finally see me differently. It's that I see myself clearly now. Not as the backup plan. Not as the comparison. Not as the quiet daughter in the background. But as the standard they never expected me to become.